meeting you right where you are on your foster care journey. This is the Forgotten Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Forgotten Podcast. I'm your host, Jami Kaeb, and I am so happy to be with you. If you are part of the foster care community, passionate about serving, or simply interested in learning more, we are here for you. In every episode of this podcast, you're going to hear from men and women who've experienced foster care to one degree or another. They may have grown up in the system, are caseworkers or foster parents, or other people who are here to bring you hope and encouragement. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe and share with a friend. Remember, you are not alone. I hope you enjoy the Forgotten Podcast. All right, Christa. Well, I am so happy to have you on today to talk about an area in foster care and adoption that really doesn't get talked about all that much. And that is also something that is quite common, but we don't necessarily realize it. And that's called food trauma. So first of all, Christa, will you just talk to us about what is this whole concept of food trauma?
Yeah, so really food trauma is any traumatic experience related to food. It can be a number of things. This is something that, is a problem in so many different parts of the world. Even here in the States, people having food insecurity, they're going hungry because of not having enough food or not having access to the right foods. That is traumatic. If food has ever been used as a punishment, if it's ever been withheld, or if you've ever had someone who's been forced to eat certain foods, that can be a traumatic experience. If you've ever had like a severe allergic reaction, or you've experienced choking or anything like that, those are traumatic things that involve food. Even certain attitudes that can lead to traumatic experiences. So maybe someone has grown up in a household where there was a parent had an unhealthy relationship to food, and so just even comments made over time maybe led someone to have, an eating disorder or things of that nature. And I think this is just so huge. We've even seen this in the past year in my state. I even saw it last week. I'm from Texas, but if you look back in 2019, when we started seeing the shutdowns happen, the lockdowns happen in quarantine, what was people's first reaction? They wanted to make sure that they had food. Yeah. Stores were getting wiped clean, okay? And even though like every state and every city was like, don't worry guys, like stores will still be open if you had food, our initial reaction as humans was panic. What if I don't have access to, what if I can't get food? What if I cannot feed my family? And even last week in my state of Texas, we went through a lot with this freak winter storm that literally never happens. I've been born and raised here. I've never seen weather like that in my life. And same thing, there were power outages everywhere. Stores were out of food. Trucks couldn't get in to bring supplies. And so it was very scary. And so those are types of things like food is a primal need. It's something that everyone needs to survive. And so this concept of food trauma is really common among all types of people. But I think that it gets left out of this conversation in foster care and adoption. It's just not something that is often talked about, but the likelihood is if you are fostering a child or you are parenting a child that was brought to your family through adoption, the likelihood is they have experienced some sort of food trauma.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and why do you think it isn't talked about? Do you think it's something is it more lack of awareness, or does it feel like a taboo topic, or why do you think?
I don't necessarily think it's a taboo topic. I don't really know why it's not talked about as much. I think honestly, because, when you're fostering or adopting, there can be, many different crises happening. And honestly, I think it's just not recognized as much. I think that, especially if you are parenting younger children, like kids just go through certain stages with food, right? Like that's just normal development to have a picky eater, or even just toddlers, right? Like yesterday they loved strawberries and today they're throwing them across the room. Like, you just don't know, And so I think that it just does not often get talked about, and that people just don't even know what to look for and how to recognize it. I know for us with international adoption, it was something that was already on our minds, even though our son was an infant when we brought him home. Just knowing like the difference of formula of what he was getting before we came home. We could not find an equivalent that was similar, even in consistency. And, we didn't know how to read the Japanese labels that they brought home, they sent us home with, and things like that. Like even just loss of birth culture and foods surrounding a culture. That is a traumatic experience. If your child has been eating a certain way for a long period of time, and then suddenly those foods are not there, that's huge to them. So
would the smells also be part of that food?
Yes, absolutely. And that's the thing, is I think we have to remember that when you are eating, you are using all of your senses. It ignites every single sense in your body. It's not just taste, it's also smell, it's also touch, it's also hearing, like what's going on in your environment. How is the food being prepared? Is when you eat, is it just a stressful environment in your home? It ignites all of those things. I think, a really important picture that I love, and I gave this example in my in a blog that I wrote called Food, Trauma, and Connection, of if you've ever seen the movie Lion. Now, it will wreck you. Like, I thought my husband was going to have to like pick me up and carry me out of the theater. Like, why did you bring me to see this? I'm like a puddle on the floor. Okay. But it's so, this one scene, I think, says so much in the movie. I'm not going to like give any spoilers. And I haven't read the book, but in the movie, Saru, who is an adult adoptee, he was adopted from India by a white Australian couple. He is in college and he's gathered with friends and they're all chatting, and he realizes, like, here I'm with all of these, other people who are Indian like I am, and yet they have experience that I did not have. And he goes into the kitchen and there is this food there, and you see in this scene this flashback that he has. He's just standing and staring at this food, and it flashes back to a scene of when he was in India as a little boy with his older brother, and they were at the market, and you could tell like they were craving this food, but they could not afford to get it. And his brother says something about like, one day we're going to have enough money to get that. And you see that. And he had never even tasted this food, but just the sight of it and the smell of it triggered a memory in him of back to his first family. And that is something that should tell us how powerful food is. It is powerful. It is, our brains are connected to our gut and all of these things. It is so important. And that to me is just such a picture of, this is something that needs to be discussed and needs to be explored more.
Yeah. Well, and it's clear you're passionate about this, but tell us where that passion came from.
Yeah. So, I kind of consider myself to be like a multi-passionate person. My tagline for my blog, Spoonful of Jordan, is adoption, motherhood, and natural health. And, I think sometimes people look at that and they're like, what if these things doesn't belong with the other? Adoption, got it. Motherhood, yep, those two make sense. Natural health, what's this thing over here? What does that mean? But for me, I have seen this really just integrate in my entire life. Like I wrote a memoir last year, my memoir called Moving Mountains. And I talk about this, where there was a season in my life where I kind of felt like my life was just all these like scattered puzzle pieces that didn't seem to fit, and I didn't really know how to put them together. But I have seen the Lord use all these things that I am passionate about, and I've seen them all come together in my own family. Cool. And part of that is health. I have my background in social work. That's what I got my degree in. And my husband and I both have backgrounds in foster care. We haven't been foster parents, but he worked in foster care for 8 years. I've been involved in child welfare for a really long time. And so I even remember in one of my child welfare classes, one of my professors pulling up a map of Dallas, a big city here in Texas, and showing us a map that there was an area in Dallas where they called it the food desert, where literally there was an area where there were no grocery stores, and we don't really have great public transportation here because we're in a really big state. So their option to get food was pretty much gas station food, which is not healthy and not, and so that kind of, I had already been on my own personal journey with health and food and unpacking that and unpacking what that means. So seeing that in college at that same time while I was getting my degree, I was teaching for a children's fitness company and did that for a long time. And it was one of those things where, I would go into preschools and daycares and I taught hundreds of kids a week, and we did group exercise classes and we talked about nutrition. And so I started to see these things connect in my life of like, food does have a place. I mean, certain schools in certain areas, their menu looked a little different than schools in other areas. And I was like, why is that? Trying to explore those things, even starting to see links between, okay, I noticed that when I come and I teach this classes and they've just had like a super sugary snack, that their behavior is a lot different than when I go to this other school and they've had like apple slices and peanut butter for a snack. And so it's those types of things that really started to get those puzzle pieces together. And so my love and my passion for social justice and social work, as well as my own journey with health and wellness and just learning the importance of, what our bodies physically need, but also how that connects emotionally and mentally, that there is a connection there. And then when we brought my son home in 2014, we went through a lot those first few years, just kind of trying to figure out some puzzle pieces with him. We finally, after 2 years constantly being in and out of the pediatrician's office and getting tests done, we found out he had, food allergies to gluten and dairy. Well, that made a lot of sense, but we didn't know that. It took a long time to figure that out. He had, just some major chronic digestive issues that we just did not know what to deal with. He was a infant. He couldn't tell us these things. And so that took a while to figure out. He was 2 before we figured all that out. And then on top of that, we were also dealing with a sensory processing disorder diagnosis. And so even those things of like, I want him to eat these foods, but he has a major aversion to these textures. So how am I going to get the nutrients into his body that he needs when he cannot handle the texture of these things, all the way to even now where we have grown leaps and bounds and made huge strides. But we're entering into a season where he's 7 now, and it is very important for us in our home to try to incorporate as much and instill a love of his birth culture. And so I've been learning to cook Japanese food while also making sure that it's gluten and dairy free and all of those things. But just even those things of getting chopsticks for him and us sitting at the table together as a family and eating a meal that a Japanese family would typically eat, are huge things. And so that is why I'm really passionate about this topic. And long story, but that's pretty much why.
That's really cool. And it is neat to see how it all combines and works together. That's really, really awesome. Yeah. I love how God does that, how he does puts those passions in early on before we necessarily even know why.
Yeah. I mean, that was a question that I asked for so long is what do you, I say this in my book, I felt like I was holding all these puzzle pieces, what do you want me to do with them, God? And he was just put them together. They'll fit. If you just put them together, they will fit.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, let's get more practical. How can we identify potential signs of food trauma in our kids?
Yeah, I'm going to grab my notes here because there's a lot. And this is something that I go into detail in the blog. I think you'll put it in the show notes, Jami. But honestly, I think the first thing I want to say is just if you are fostering or adopting, kind of expect it. I think about just even our own journey with sensory processing disorder. If we hadn't like gone through some trainings and read some books, we probably wouldn't have recognized it. Okay. But the only reason we were seeing some signs was because thankfully, like we had gotten some good education and it was part of the training that we did. So we were able to recognize those things. So I think first and foremost, I just want to say, like, if you are fostering or adopting, maybe just expect this. Expect that maybe this is a likely part of your child's journey. And I think, kind of like I said, anytime, even if it's not a transracial adoption, every family has their own culture, right? Yeah. Like even, there are certain foods that my husband's family eat that I'm like, why do y'all eat it like that? Like we don't do that in my family, It's just an adjustment. But I think some major ones to look out for are hoarding food, sneaking food, stealing food. If you're, finding things missing from your pantry or they're hidden under the bed or blankets or wherever, that's a pretty sure sign that there was probably some food insecurity at one point in their life.
And maybe just for those of us who don't know I know food insecurity, but define that, because I think that could be helpful.
Yeah, food insecurity is lack of access to food. Okay. They didn't have it. If they're, a security would be like, that you are going to get 3 meals a day and 2 snacks. Yep. If you didn't know where your next meal was coming from and you didn't know when you were going to be able to eat next and when you were going to get fed, that is food insecurity. Okay. Yeah, even if it's inconsistency, if you have an infant who, was in an orphanage and they were only, they weren't fed on a consistent schedule, that is food insecurity. They didn't know when their next bottle was going to be there. So I'm glad that you said that, because that is an important definition. So hoarding, sneaking, stealing food is a sure sign. I think that there's probably some food insecurity there. Any sort of like severe aversions to certain textures, smells, specific foods. And when I say like severe aversions, I don't just mean like it's a toddler meltdown. Okay. I think a lot of times if you're a relatively seasoned foster or adopted parent, you can kind of tell the difference between like, this is a typical age appropriate meltdown. And this is not. Like if it is like disrupting your daily activity, if it's that severe, then we have a problem. Okay. I think that is a sign because like I said in the beginning, there can be abuse that has happened with food. It could have been withheld as a punishment. It could have played a role in some other abusive situations. And so if there is a certain aversion to a texture, that may be something to note. That may be something to look at, and it may be deeper than I just don't like it. Yeah. So that is a big deal. Overeating or undereating, and kind of, same thing if they're overeating and there's like significant weight gain or undereating and they're not growing. They're not, they're kind of like on that failure to thrive chart area. Like that's something that you want to see. Like if they're, they may be malnourished, they may not, their body may not have got like developmentally gotten what it needed, food wise at the time. So they may be lacking certain nutrients, some certain vitamins, minerals that help your body absorb those things. They could be lacking that. And so that is a sign as well. If there are significant developmental delays, especially with like chewing and swallowing, that's a big one. And even just like being able to like feed themselves with utensils and things like that, there's kind of a, developmental line along those things of like, even when they're little, it's, the little finger pincher when they're able to like grab and pick up food, there's stages of development. Some of those were probably likely missed in certain situations. And so that's something to be aware of. Any chronic constipation or significant digestive issues, that's a really big deal. That is a pretty big sign that like there's some disruption going on in the gut, and that's going to affect their eating. That's going to affect their appetites. If they're chronically constipated and they don't want to eat, well, that's going to cause a problem with their appetite. They're not hungry. So lack of appetite is a big one. Also, just overall, like if they have like a major decrease in their immune system. What we eat is, tied a lot to like how our immune system works. And so if they're like constantly sick, like they catch everything, like you're getting called to come pick them up from daycare on like, a weekly or biweekly basis, that is a sign. And then if they're like overly irritable, that's a big one. Hangry is real. Like like me as a mom, if I forget to eat breakfast, then by like 10:30, I'm a little bit hangry, and I'm probably going to be a lot more irritable and short than is necessary because I'm hungry. So if they're overly irritable a lot of the time, that's a big one. For older kids too, especially we're getting that preteen and teenager stage, if they're very, very obsessive about foods that they eat, obsessive about calories, obsessive about their body image, their size, that's a big one. And then really there can be some overlap with other mental health issues or addictions. So if that is part of their history, that's also something to be aware of. So those are some signs to look for and think about.
And something I've heard you say is you might have adopted an infant who's maybe only been in their home for a few months. They can still have that, right?
Absolutely.
Because they don't have to remember it to know that it's there.
Our body keeps the score, right? If you've ever read that book, but I think a big thing that we have to remember is that food is primal. It is a primal need. We have to have it in order to survive. And with kids, with babies, with infants, I mean, if they're in your home, like they are dependent on you to feed them. So if they have had inconsistent care from adults or from a caregiver, or their, first family was in a situation where there was a lack of access to food and it couldn't be helped, it wasn't their fault, but that is going to flesh itself out in certain behaviors. Behavior is communication, right? And so some of these things that you might see, like the hoarding and the sneaking and the stealing, or meltdowns because you ask them to wait for 10 minutes because you're about to feed them, you know that the food is coming.
Yeah.
They don't know that the food is coming though. Asking a child to wait who has had severe food insecurity in their life, they don't. What does wait mean? Because they could have waited an entire day before they got their next meal. And you're only asking them to wait 10 minutes, but they don't understand that. It's those types of things that, mama and baby are connected in the womb. They're getting their nutrients from mama. It starts like that is a primal need. And so I think that we have to remember that, and that, when we're seeing concerning behaviors surrounding food, that they are likely operating in like what the Whole Brain Child, that book, I love it, what they call the downstairs brain. It's that primitive, primal brain where it's fight, flight, or freeze, and they're just trying to survive. And that's where they're operating from. And it can be frustrating in the moment, but that's where, we need to remember that compassion and remember, that, these kids may have endured something that we never have, and they don't know how to process that. And we, as the safe adults, need to help them.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned the brain, because that's actually where I was going to go next.
Yeah.
And I'm going to quote you from your blog post, one of your blog posts. You said, the physical and the emotional are connected. And through food, though food may be wait, let me, I don't know if I wrote this wrong in the food. Okay. Okay. We're going to start over.
Okay.
Okay. I am glad you mentioned the brain, because that's where we're going to go next. I'm going to share a portion of a blog post you wrote. You said this: the physical and the emotional are connected. And though food may be a complicated, even painful subject, it can also be used to connect and heal. Eating food is a full body and full brain experience. So you started talking a bit about the brain, but speak more to the connection between our brains and food.
Yeah, well, I think, this is even something you could talk to your kids about. Our brains and our bodies send signals to each other. This is why I'm big on natural health, because I like to look at things holistically. our bodies are not separate pieces. They all work together. And so, yes, these things are connected. And you think about, even like I mentioned earlier with, Lion, Saru had not even eaten that food in that scene. And yet it triggered this memory in him. You think about like, sometimes we turn to food for comfort. We've had a stressful day, and stress hormones are going to make us crave certain things. For some people, they want the bag of chips. Yeah. For me, you better give me all that dark chocolate better be in that pantry. Okay.
And for me, it's chewy sweet tarts.
There you go. Okay. So we see that even there's stress going on, it's sending signals to our brain, and it's like, you need comfort, you need this, and it's going to make you crave certain things. But this is, and it can, we have memories with food, right? Like there's certain foods that I eat that I'm like, oh, that's a tradition in my family. And it makes me think of those times where, if I eat key lime pie, I remember when my family went on vacation to the Florida Keys, those types of things. Like those are connected. When you smell chocolate chip cookies, do you think of your grandmother baking chocolate chip cookies in the oven? Those things are linked. They are connected. It makes us feel certain things. And there's a great short that you can find on Disney Plus. If you have Disney Plus, I'm a big Disney person. It's called Inner Workings. And I love it. And my son loves this short. It's hilarious. But you see the connection between the gut and the brain. Okay. It basically shows like the inside of like what this guy is thinking in his brain. He wakes up in the morning and you see like the purple cartoon brain, and it sends a little signal, and it goes down, and you see like his, small intestine, large intestines, and they're like, I'm so hungry. Like they're clapping their hands like, feed me. And then you see his brain thinking, pancakes sound good, and bacon and eggs and hash brown. And then, so then he thinks, I'm going to go and stop at this restaurant on my way to work. It's those types of things, right? Your brain and your gut are sending signal to each other. I'm hungry. Okay. I need to eat, okay? There's hormones involved. When you eat certain things, certain hormones are emitted. When you're hungry, certain hormones are emitted. Just like we talked about with stress, if you're in a chronic state of stress, you're probably not going to be making the wisest eating choices because you're just going to go off what you're craving. And it doesn't mean it's always good, right? So that is definitely, something to be thinking about. And I think sometimes when we're in this situation, it can be frustrating or it can be overwhelming. But the good news is that there is healing. Like just like so maybe there has been, in the Whole Brain Child, they talk about the rewiring of the brain, or how certain neurons that fire together, wire together. Okay, well that can be good experiences or not good experiences. So if your child has experienced that food insecurity where they didn't know where their next meal was coming, then there has been something wired in their brain that needs to be rewired. They need to know, like, hey, buddy, when you're in our home and when you're in this family, you are safe and we are going to take care of your needs. Yeah. But that's going to take time to disconnect I don't know where my next meal is going to come. That's going to take time. You're going to have to put, some things in that trust bank, like Dr. Karen Purvis talks about, in order to get them to understand that you're safe here and I will take care of you, and you are going to get fed. You are going to have water. You are going to have what you need. So is there healing? Yes. I think that there's going to be a process of physical healing where you may have to do some gut healing. You may have to cut out some inflammatory foods, or change their diet and things like that, just to get their gut in a better, healthier place. There's also emotional healing that is going to come along with that, where you, as the safe adult, are going to be able to do some things with your child to create that sense of felt safety and that security. And even just being able to, eat together, sit down and eat together as a family, get them involved with you in the kitchen, teach them those life skills. Like, I could talk about food all day. I love it. Like there's so much that, healing that can come from it. It's just going to take time, and it's going to take, preparation and honestly some unpacking on your part as the adult.
Yeah. And you mentioned the term felt safety, and we've definitely used that before in the podcast, but to let our listeners know who maybe haven't heard that, that means they it's one thing to be safe, and when you're in a safe home, you're safe, but that doesn't mean you feel safe because of what you've experienced. And so you're talking how that child is safe, but now you've got to work to build that trust with them so that they can actually feel safe as well.
Absolutely.
It's such a big thing. I remember learning that the first time.
Yeah, it's so huge, and it is hard. And I think, there's some great, I love the chapter in The Connected Child. I forget what chapter it is. It's one of the later chapters, 10 or 11, where she talks about nurturing brain chemistry. And food is a big part of that because, when you eat certain things, it does certain things to your body and your brain. It's why we need to have a diverse diet. It's why we need to have a healthy diet. It's why, certain people can't eat certain foods, or if there's an allergy involved, or things like that. But she gives so many great examples in there of being able to create some of that felt safety. And so be creative. Like something that we saw with our son is he really, really loved sweets. Most kids do, but there was a season where if we went to a birthday party or something like that, it was, number one, already complicated because he couldn't eat a lot of what was there. So I had to be prepared to make sure that I had things for him that he could eat that were a yes, right? But he also, it was just like that kind of like, but I don't know when I'm going to get a sweet again. And so there were times where I was like, I don't know, we're going to be able to go to birthday parties anymore, you guys. Like, it's too much. It's so overwhelming. It wrecks our whole day, but how can we create that sense of felt safety? Okay. So we started, he was little at this time. He was like 4. So, my husband and I talked about it and had this idea of like, okay, let's just kind of make it, we never wanted to, something that I said when I taught children's fitness and nutrition was we wouldn't say like junk food. We would just say like there's healthy foods and then there's sometimes treats. I never want to shame, like, no, you can't have a piece of chocolate cake. I want a piece of chocolate cake sometimes, you know? So it's okay to have those things sometimes, right? But we shouldn't have them every single day. So something that we did is we literally went to like the dollar spot and got like a thing of raffle tickets, but it was something tangible that he needed to see it, right? He needed to see it. And so we would pull off 2 raffle tickets and say, okay, buddy, today you have 2 raffle tickets. You can turn in a raffle ticket to mommy or daddy when you want like a sweet treat. And so I would have, little things that were like, they were sweet treats. They weren't like, straight up candy, but it was like something sweet. We met in the middle. It was a compromise. And so that created a sense of safety for him where, at first he was like, well, here's my 2 raffle tickets. Like, you can have them, give me my sweet treats. But we saw that over time doing that, then we didn't have to use those raffle tickets anymore because he knew that, it was a sometimes treat and that eventually, it was going to be a yes. You start to get those tools of like, okay, can you give them a yes? Can we work on accepting no? All of that is going to take time. But just creating those things, if you've got, a kiddo who is struggling, maybe they're sneaking food or they're, struggling at bedtime, that can be bedtime in general can be a really triggering time. A lot of kids have experienced going to bed hungry. And so even we saw this, with my son of just offering a snack before bed. There was a season where like he could not go to bed without a snack. He needed it. He wouldn't always eat it. But he needed to know that it was there. And so we would leave, a little protein bar or, a little thing of veggie straws, like something, that's okay to have in your room that's not going to make a mess, that's somewhat healthy. He needed that for a season. Sometimes he would eat it, but if he woke up in the middle of the night, he needed to see that was there. That's that felt safety of like, yeah, there's food in the pantry, but sometimes they need that felt safety of like, mom and dad set this right here for me. They're going to take care of me. So maybe you have a yes jar or a yes box that you put, healthy foods in, apples, oranges, some granola bars, things that are healthy that they can have, maybe even keep in their room, bottled waters, things like that. And then get that felt safety, put that in your trust bank. And then over time, just watch and see like, okay, can the box not be in the room anymore? Maybe can the box just sit outside the door? Okay, we've handled that. can the box now go and sit on the kitchen table? Okay, we've handled that. So now, can that food just go back in the pantry because they know it's going to be there? Yeah. But it's going to take time to do those things and to build those things, right?
Yeah. Wow, that's good. Well, you've mentioned triggers a few times. How do we recognize those triggers in our kids? And what are the triggers? I mean, triggers can look so different. What are some examples?
I mean, I think some of the examples, like we've already seen, of just some of those behaviors, the meltdowns, those types of things. I think the biggest thing with triggers, it's so hard, especially with food, to talk about this because just like you said, triggers can flush themselves out in a number of ways. This is where I think as the parent, you are going to have to do some digging. I love what they say in the Whole Brain Child of chase the why. That is like one of my favorite phrases, because when you've got this concerning behavior going on and you're like, I don't know where this is coming from, well, then guess what? You got to put on your detective hat as a parent and you got to start chasing the why. And I know, especially if you've got multiple kids running around and you're trying to do visits and you've got court dates and you have all these things, it is hard to take the time sometimes to chase the why. But it is so important if we want our kids to heal and we want to put them on the path of healing and success in the long term, then that's our job as a parent. Get a journal, chase the why. Start with, okay, what are they eating every day? Okay, what are they gravitating towards? Is it they only want goldfish? Is it they only want that? You know, like, what does it look like when I offer them this? What is their reaction to it? When I'm making dinner, what's the situation like? Is dinner time stressful, or are any meal times stressful? Why is that? What led up to that? What was going on before that event? How did we come back from that? Like what was the come down after the fact? You're gonna have to put your detective hat on a little bit and chase the why and figure out if there's something going on. You're going to need to see it. Even recording, like, okay, how many times a day are they going to the bathroom? Are they dehydrated? You know, like, is there, if there's chronic constipation, like when was the last time they had a bowel movement? These are things that you're going to want to record, especially if you need to take that step and find professional help. There's nothing wrong with that. But they're probably going to ask some of those questions, and you as a parent need to say, here's what I've got. This is what I've got. Can you help me put this puzzle piece together? And I did also want to note, I think that this is important too, because I saw this often when my husband and we worked in a residential treatment center for foster kids. And I could go on a whole other thing about like the diet of what they fed the kids there. But a lot of the kids there were on medications. If you have kids who are on medications, that also can play a role with food. If you're seeing weight gain or a lack of appetite or things of that nature, that could be a side effect of a medication. So just be aware of that. If you have a kiddo who is on a med, know what the side effects are. If you're seeing some concern in that regard, if it's overlapping with some food, that may be something you want to bring up to, a medical provider, whoever you're seeing, a pediatrician, whoever it is. But I think that's important to note because, if there's a side effect of nausea or anything like that, that's probably going to affect their eating.
Yeah,
so sure. I just want to also throw that out there. That is, another piece of the puzzle that you may need to think about and when you are chasing the why and seeing what these triggers are.
For sure. And I think that you've given us some great hope too with that healing is possible. I love the chase the why. I love the recognize it's going to take time, right? Like that we have to parent differently than we maybe thought or were parented. Maybe we would have grown up and food was never allowed in the bedrooms. So like we have to really kind of reframe our thinking as well, don't we?
Yes.
As parents. Speak more to that.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. Thank you for bringing that up. I think this is something that I actually spoke about at the end of my blog, with just, if you go and look at it, there's a series of questions there for you as the parent, as the adult, because you're so right. Guess what? If your kiddo has a trigger with food, it's likely going to trigger something in you from your past. Isn't that typically how it works? Like, don't we know this when we're parenting with, kiddos who have experienced trauma? If we're carrying our trauma too, then those triggers are going to are going to come at each other, and it's probably not going to be good. So yeah, I love that you brought that up. You are going to have to unpack your own relationship with food as a parent. If you have had issues with food, or everybody's got a relationship with food. Everyone has a relationship with food, right? And so you need to unpack what yours is, because that is going to come into play with your child. There were definitely things that I had to let go because I had been on my own health journey. I didn't grow up, eating organic or understanding, how nutrition works or anything like that. That is just something that I honestly researched and learned myself. And I always, love to encourage, especially other moms, never underestimate a mama who is empowered and is a good advocate for her kiddo. You'll make it happen, right? Like, don't underestimate an empowered mama. She'll fight for what is best for her kiddo, right? And so part of that is understanding what you're bringing to the table, because you are bringing something. So for me, I had to let go. Like, of course, I had this picture in my head of like, my kid's going to eat like bell peppers and hummus for a snack, and going to be like the healthiest, because I had to unpack my own history of some body image issues that, were my own, that wasn't because of my parents or anything else. It was just, things that happened as a teenage girl. There were some things that I had to unpack with my own journey with food. I had come a long way. But then, when my kiddo didn't want all the like super healthy things like my quinoa and black bean bowl, he didn't like that, like
Imagine that.
Imagine. You mean he wanted French fries instead?
I don't understand.
What? I don't get it. And so I had to unpack those things of like, why does this bother me so much that he won't eat my quinoa black bean bowl? Why, like, is it that big of a deal? Yeah. And so those were some things I had to unpack. Who was putting that pressure on me as a mom? No one else but myself, because of my own issues. Nobody else cared what my kid was eating. I cared. And I cared what it looked like. And I cared, about his, and it's good to care about his health, and I want him to be healthy. And, we talk so much about that, but you are gonna, if you have things in your past that you are gonna have to deal with, like you said, even if it was like a huge rule in your house growing up, not to bring food in the bedroom. Well, guess what? You're gonna have to let that go if your kid is sneaking food in the bedroom.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's really good. Talk to the parent this is all starting to make sense to them, and they're going, oh my goodness, I didn't realize. And now they're feeling, there's like probably mixed feelings of like, okay, that makes sense, but also that is a lot of pressure. Like, what do I do now? Like, share some hope of like maybe even just first steps.
Yeah. I know that sometimes I still feel like this 7 years in, that there are times where I'm just like, this is overwhelming.
Yeah.
You are constantly unpacking, that new information. You're having to parent differently. You're having to learn all these things about the brain and trauma and all these things that, if you have biological children, you probably didn't have to do that. It's likely that maybe you did. Cool. But I don't know a lot of parents who were like reading the whole brain child. They were reading what to expect when you're expecting, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just different. Like, this process is just different, and it can be really lonely because sometimes people just don't get it. So I think first and foremost, I just want to say you're doing a great job. The fact that like you're listening and that you're learning and you're leaning in, can we just like celebrate that win?
That's right.
Like, I think we've lost the art of celebrating the small things, and we need to celebrate it. We shouldn't just be celebrating the big things. We need to be celebrating all the little milestones, and not just for our kids, but for you too as a parent. So the fact that you're here, the fact that you're listening, the fact that you are trying to educate yourself, the fact that you love your kiddo, whoever is in your home at this time, and you are wanting to fight for them, good job. Like, you're doing a great job. Okay. Like, let's celebrate the fact that you're here first and foremost. I think secondly, before you start to just like do all the things, I think go back to that chase the why. Like, let's just start there. First step is, let's unpack this. Chase the why for yourself. What's my own relationship with food? How how am I being triggered in this situation? Because you, as the safe adult, you've got to understand what your triggers are. You're not going to be able to help your child regulate if you don't know yourself, right? So I think first step is, great job, you're here, leaning in, yay, celebrate you. Big hug if I could give you one. And then secondly, like chase the why, both for yourself, unpack that, then chase it for your kid and see what those needs are, what those triggers are. And then really your next steps are going to go from there. But I think as much as you can create connection around food and make it fun, make it a time where it's relationship building. And again, this is probably going to go back to your triggers. Like if I love to cook, actually being in the kitchen de-stresses me. I know that a lot of moms are like, no, thank you. I'm like, please let me cook dinner. I would like to be in the kitchen. Like, I love to cook and bake, and it's one of my favorite things. But if that's not you, then you may need to unpack that, because that's going to affect how you, present a meal, or how, if you're frazzled during that time. So make food a good connection place. And maybe you make it a point where you and your kiddo make a smoothie together every day, and you guys get straws and you share a smoothie together, and you see who can drink it fastest, or, teach them how to, if you're making hamburgers at dinner at night, use it as a sensory activity. Hey, baby, come over here and help me get your fingers in the meat, and we're going to make meat patties together. Make it involve them. That is part of how that felt safety is going to come, is getting them involved. And then you guys have fun together when it involves food. Make it a family connection build. Can you play a card game while you're eating? Whatever it is, see how you can create connection surrounding food. The felt safety is going to be step number one. But then, in addition to that, make it something that is a connection tool, so we can start to rewire and get that healing process going of, it doesn't always have to be stressful. It's not always a negative experience. What can you do to create some positive experiences and positive connections between you and your child with food?
That's great.
Yeah.
And I know you've mentioned a few resources already, but do you have any others? We will add these to the show notes, but you mentioned Whole Brain Child, you mentioned the Connected Child. What other resources would you suggest people look into?
I really like The Out of Sync Child and The Out of Sync Child Has Fun by Carol Kranowitz. That goes a lot with sensory processing disorder. Even if your child has not been diagnosed with sensory processing disorder, kind of like food. Everybody has a relationship with food. Well, everybody has sensory preferences, right? So maybe it's not a disorder, but also with food, because it's your whole senses. She just has some great insight there of integrating some sensory things along with food. Maybe you get, dried rice and you create a sensory bin out of that, or, things of that nature, just having those certain textures there. She has some great activities that involve, some food and things like that, which I think is really great. And part of experiencing that fun. There's also a book called Love Me, Feed Me. This is especially if you have someone who has adopted internationally. She has a lot of information on that, but I don't 100% agree with all the things she says in there, but she has a lot of really great things to say and a lot of really good insight. Yeah. So those are some big resources. As far as with kids, there's some great books. We love the How Do Dinosaur series books. So How Do Dinosaurs Say Goodnight? It's one of those that I think is very playful. When you get that playful engagement, it kind of shows them this is the right way to do things. You kind of see the dinosaurs doing redos in a sense, but it's really silly and funny. They have a great one called How Do Dinosaurs Eat Their Food? And so you see the dinosaurs, oh, they're making a big mess, or, oh, no, I don't like that, so I'm throwing a big fit. But then you see, oh, no, I'm going to sit at the table. The dinosaurs do this. And so it's really cute if you have young ones to do the How Do Dinosaurs Eat Their Food? So those are some good ones that I really like.
I love it. I think that is one key that I'm learning about parenting, is making things as playful. I mean, I have right now we have 8 children now in our home. and 6 of them are teenagers. And so I find that it always works better parenting teenagers when I come at them with a little playfulness as opposed to go do that, right?
Yes.
And so you can kind of get the same message across, and that's what it made me think of with the How Do Dinosaur and food and everything. I think no matter what the age of our kids, and we can come up at it with a little more playfulness, not taking ourselves or them too seriously, I think it helps.
I love that. Playfulness is huge. That's like step 1 in disarming that fear response, right? Like, you know, we don't always have to like come down with the hammer. It can be as simple like, oh, is that how we sit at the table? No.
Right.
You know, it can just be something super playful, and play is going to, engaging playfully probably looks different with your teenagers, right?
Yes,
than it did if they were little,
For sure,
And so, you know your kids, but I think that's where that fun comes involved of like, even kind of going back to like, if you grew up like everything on your plate has to be eaten, okay, that's gonna, you need to let that go, or don't play with your food. Okay, well, if you want to add some fun and get a healthy relationship, how's that going to work when like your sensory activity is to boil some noodles and let them play with the noodles? They're playing with their food, but that's part of the healing process of, not taking yourself so seriously and making it fun.
Yeah. Wow, Christa, so much here, and I have just so enjoyed hearing from you, and you've brought us a lot of practical, a lot of heart, a lot of just the why. So I just really thank you for being here today, and I know our listeners are going to be blessed by this today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here, and no, I'm not an expert on this, just sharing my experience as a mom and what I've learned, but I really do, hope that it is encouraging, and just know that you've got this. You can do this, mamas.
Well, I hope today's episode was an encouragement to you wherever you are on this foster care journey. Now, we want you to stay connected, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Also, we have a ton of great content for you over at theforgotteninitiative.org. Thank you for watching, and I can't wait to see you next time.